Welcome. Looks like we have two so far.
I am going to make you the host
Okay.
and then I'm gonna hop off.
Okay.
And everything should still record, and then you'll have access to whatever you want, share your screen, this, that, you'll be the host.
Okay. Okay.
Perfect. Alrighty.
I'll wait a couple more minutes and see if we have any more that join us. If you guys want to interact at all, you can go ahead and unmute if you have questions as we go. We don't need to wait till the end.
Sounds good.
Okay. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to myself. All right, well, I'll go ahead and get started because I know we're recording, so I'm not sure how long we have. But first of all, I just want to say happy election day, everyone. I hope everyone's going to get out and vote if you haven't already. And it's awesome weather, probably the best weather I can remember for an election day. But today I was going to go over a little bit about fees and the different ways that they're disclosed at the closing and just things to kind of look out for your buyers and sellers. I don't know what everybody's experience is with the settlement statement. It's also known as the ALTA, which just stands for the American Land Title Association. And so it's referred to as a settlement statement or the ALTA, but it's ultimately the same thing. There's also a CD, a closing disclosure, that goes out for buyer and seller, but we aren't supposed to share that information with the agents. So the ALTA was created when the lender switched over to the TRID format. And this is to keep all the information from the buyer and seller as private. So all we can see is their numbers. We can't see interest rates, payments, anything like that. So it's supposed to be just basically debits and credits. So I thought I'd start with the seller side ALTA. I kind of just made a test file based on standard and customary fees. So this would be on your standard residential purchase, no homeowners association, just your standard, Hennepin County purchase. So sales price and seller credit will show at the top. So if there is seller paid closing costs in the purchase agreement, it will show as a debit to the seller, even though it says seller credit. It's a bit confusing. I'm not really sure who created the templates for the ALTA, but it does confuse agents. I get a lot of call on it asking why it's called a seller credit when it's a debit to the seller, but it's in the debit column. And this one, it was a 3% seller paid closing costs. Then next down below, we have the prorations for the taxes. So this time of the year, taxes were due October 15th for the second half, and the second half goes from July 1st to December 31st. So in this scenario, the seller already paid for taxes for the entire year. So we have a closing date of November 27th, which means that the seller will get a credit from November 27th to the start of next year, based on a per diem that our system figures out for us. It's down to the penny based on number of days in the calendar year. Down below, you're going to see the settlement charges. So I've got the seller closing fee. That ranges by title company, but it's typically anywhere between $395 and about $550. And then a wire fee right now, because of COVID, a lot of times, most times, almost always, sellers are not at the table to receive their funds. So many times we're wiring, and every title company has a wire charge. They vary between $30 and $45 or so. And then in this scenario, the seller has one payoff. So there is a payoff processing fee. Again, this number varies by title company between $30 and $50. 55, I've seen them even with some title companies. Down here, I have the commissions listed. So there was a broker admin fee, which you know is customary for seller and buyer to pay. And then the commissions were based on 3.7 to the listing agent and, 3.3 to the listing agent and 2.7 to the selling agent for their total of 6%, which is customary. Down below, you're going to see recording charges, which in this scenario, the seller has one document we're recording. It's $46 per document. Then there's a conservation fee for all of the metro counties. So it would be any of the 9 metro counties, and they also add in a few. Rule of thumb is if it starts with the W, the county, that there's a conservation fee. And then second page here, we've got deed tax to the county. And I get questions on this a lot from the seller. So obviously it's in your best interest to provide an accurate as possible net sheet to your seller, because they are responsible in paying $3.30 per thousand in all the counties except for Hennepin and Ramsey. It's $3.40 per thousand. So that's kind of a large fee that sneaks up on sellers if they're not aware of it. And then down below, I've got the payoff. Obviously, this will vary on your seller. We do order the payoff statement, try to get it as close as possible to the closing date, and then we pad it with a couple days, just because if we're going to wire it or overnight it, or if there's a delay in the closing. And then we almost always collect for an estimated final water bill to the city, assuming that there is not a well on the property. And typically we will email the city. They'll give us an amount based on the seller's average usage. And then sometimes they'll attach a final bill that's actually due at the time. So then down below, you see the debits minus their credits. And then this amount, the $78,631.48, is to the seller. So you should be getting a copy of this prior to the closing from your closer, and it should be sent to you when it's finalized. And it's a good idea to go over those numbers with your seller and compare it to the net sheet. It just alleviates a lot of questions at the table when they go to their pre-sign, and then they kind of know what they're expecting. They can ask questions, or you can ask questions from your title company before the pre-sign, just because a lot of times the agents aren't coming to the pre-sign, so we don't know what the seller is expecting. So this is a standard seller side Alta, pretty straightforward. Switch over to the buyer side Alta. So again, you should be getting a copy of this from your closer as soon as we have all the final numbers from the lender. And back before TRID started, the title company was required to send the final numbers to the buyers before closing, and we were required to tell them the amount to bring and all of that. But because of TRID, now the lenders are responsible in getting those numbers to the buyer. So we hope that they always send the final to the buyer once we have the final numbers, but many times we're finding out that they're sending numbers a few days before closing, updating numbers, and then the actual finals are not getting resent to the buyer. So again, it's important. We send these out to you as the agent, go over them with your buyer and make sure it matches what they were expecting to bring to the table. Just so again, to alleviate any questions or surprises at the table, such as needing additional funds. So again, this is the buyer side of the seller Alta that we just went over with. So the same sales price will show at the top. They're borrowing $300,000 of the loan amount, and then they got a credit for those seller pays, the 3% seller paid closing costs. Again, shows as a seller credit. It's really a debit to the seller. They are going to give a credit to the seller for taxes because the seller already paid. So again, from the 27th of the month to the start of the next year. And then I just put in some fees that are pretty customary. Usually are seeing points or an origination fee based on the loan amount. I would say 1 to 1.5% is pretty normal right now, depending on if there's seller paid closing costs that are involved, because then they can add to the closing fees. There's typically processing, underwriting. Right now, there's almost always an appraisal. Sometimes there's a waiver based on the lender and the property. So I have seen even on a purchase, some appraisals are getting waived. It's pretty rare, but I've seen it now. A credit report, flood determination, tax service fee, these are all pretty customary with each lender. And then the buyer is going to have a first payment due on January 1st. So anytime you close in the month of November, your first payment will be due January 1st. If you were to close the start of December, then it would bump it all the way to the beginning of February. So in this case, they're paying a few days of interest. Their first payment will be due January 1st. On a mortgage, you always pay interest backwards. So it's a little bit confusing to people. They're asking, why am I collecting interest only through December 1st, but then it's due January 1st? It's because January 1st, they will pay for December's interest. So you're always paying it backwards. Then there's typically, I would say 99% of the time, the buyers are escrowing, and it's going to be based off of when the taxes and insurance are due. So in this case, I just chose 4 months for each, and then there's usually an aggregate number that spits out when the lender puts in due dates and amounts. I put in our standard closing fees. So title companies, again, range from about $250 up to about $450, $495 for their closing fee. Search and exam charges, title services, which kind of incorporates name searches, assessment searches, that sort of thing. Lender's title policy is based on the loan amount that's borrowed, and then the owner's policy is based on the sales price. So the more that the lender or the borrower borrows towards the purchase price, the cheaper the owner's policy is for them, so that it always totals up to what it would be for that purchase price. Again, customary broker admin fee. The buyer will pay to record the deed as well as their new mortgage. Again, that $5 conservation fee, that's for every deed or mortgage filed in the state and then, or in the county. And then the mortgage registration tax, again, is based off of the loan amount in this case. And it is $3.30, or I'm sorry, $2.30 per thousand in all counties except Hennepin and Ramsey are $2.40 per thousand. And then the total and then they usually collect for a 12-month homeowner's insurance up front. So the debits minus the credits in this scenario, the borrower is bringing in $53,458.72. So typically what we ask for is a cashier's check or a wire. I know you probably all are aware of the wire fraud that's been prevalent lately. So a lot of buyers are not comfortable with sending wires anymore. And most title companies are now accepting cashier's checks for any amount, but it's always a good idea to check on behalf of your buyer. They should get that information prior to the close. And then we will send them wire instructions if they choose to wire ahead of time. So again, I just picked a standard transaction. If there are association dues added in, if the property was subject to an association, you would see prorations based on if it's an annual or monthly or quarterly dues. You would see prorations between the buyer and seller for that as well. And then a lot of associations or management companies are charging move-in and move-out fees or kind of a down payment towards equity investment and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of fees that can be added in when there is an association. So I would recommend for a seller or a buyer net sheet that you should be adding in, if there's an association, maybe a $500 general fee for that, just in case to cover your bases. So there's no surprises at the table. But that's about it that I had for fees. Again, this is something that you should be reviewing, especially with your seller. Your buyer usually gets the CD quite a bit ahead of time, the preliminary CD and their loan estimate from their lender. So they have time to review everything, but many times not getting the final seller numbers from the seller's title company until right before the closing. So it's important to review, make sure everything looks accurate. And if anything's missing, sometimes there'll be an escrow between buyer and seller for something that wasn't completed, that was supposed to be done, or there'll be invoices to pay for work that was completed by the seller, electrical, plumbing, that kind of thing. And so you want to just make sure that everything you're expecting to be on there is on there. It's pretty common for title companies to not receive their some amendments or addendums to the PA. And so then we are finding out, kind of last minute that there was something that was supposed to be collected. Also, one of the things I should have put on here, but kind of didn't think about it till after the fact, is a home warranty. Many times there's a home warranty that the buyer agrees to pay for, or the seller, agrees to pay for, or maybe the buyer wants to order one on their own. We will collect for that on the settlement statement as well, and we will ask for an invoice from whoever ordered it. So if you ever have any questions on this, even if I'm not working with you as your title company, you can go ahead and send it over to me for review, and I can always help you out with accuracy. Or if you ever have questions on filling out a net sheet or anything like that, you can go to our website. It's really slick. It's thetitlegroupinc.com. And on the bottom right, there is a get a quote, and you can do it for a seller net sheet, or you can do it for a buyer as well. So it's kind of nice. You can just plug in sales price. And if it's for a buyer, you put in their loan amount, and it will give you an itemized list of fees for the title company. And then obviously for your buyers, they would have to get their loan estimate from the lender. But it's kind of a nice little tool for your net sheets. It will calculate the deed tax for you. It will, if you know the tax amount, you can put in the tax amount, and it will give you the prorations based on your closing day. And that way you can put in different scenarios. If you have multiple offers at different amounts with different seller paid closing costs, then you can kind of base it off of that. So kind of a nice tool to have in your back pocket. So
Question on the lender CD.
the lender CD will go,
Yep.
will come. Did you want to see one?
Well, no, I just had a question. Typically, you know, they need to get them out 3 days prior to the close
Correct.
date. So do they
Correct.
typically send it to you to balance first before sending out? I've
Yes.
run across where some have, you know, didn't do that. They sent it out 3 days and it's signed. But I guess I've been told that it doesn't have to be exact. Is that?
Exactly. That is the problem with TRID. So the lenders are liable for getting that out 3 days prior to closing, 3 full days, not including the day of closing. So if you're going to close Friday, they need to have it out to them by Tuesday morning. So what you're talking about is they'll send it out to the buyer just to get that 3-day requirement. Then they'll update it and make changes, send it to us. We'll add in, sometimes those prorations are wrong for the lender, or they won't know about the association dues, or many times there's many things that can come up. Then we send them a revised CD, and they are responsible for sending it out to the buyer. Many times that doesn't happen. So typically it's in the buyer's favor, which is a good surprise. I can cut them a check at the table, but a lot of times, you know, sometimes it's not in their favor, and so they're having. So the frustrating part about that is we don't really know as the title company what numbers were sent and when. So we have to kind of go with the assumption that the lender sent the most accurate settlement or CD. That's why we have the settlement statement, and we send it out to the lenders or to the agents, and that way you can review them with your buyer and make sure that it's the amount they were expecting to bring. My assistant Allison will go an extra step on buyer side CD or for buyer side closings, and she will send out a final email to the buyer saying, you know, here's what you need for your closing tomorrow. Here's the amount for your cashier's check. And then we'll get questions like, wait, that's not what I signed off on. And then we just explain, you know, there were updates made and this is your final. So unfortunately,
Gotcha.
A lot of times there's a lack of communication. So
Yeah, because I was just wondering if that then qualifies for their 3-day, even though they sent it, you know, even though it wasn't 100% spot on, they
Right.
didn't escrow enough or whatever.
Yep, here's why it's okay, because the lenders are only held to a 10% variable. So as long as their numbers are within 10% of what they originally estimated, then it's fine. And not all numbers are included in that 10%. So escrows aren't included, prorations aren't included, things like that. It would just be fees. So anything
Okay.
that's considered an APR fee. So it's really not accurate a lot of the times when they get that 3-day CD.
Got it.
So-
Okay, that's great. Good information.
Right. So so what I always recommend is just staying in good communication with the lender. You know, a lot of times if you have lender partners that you refer to, then you have a good relationship with them and you know kind of what to expect after you work with them. But you know, sometimes the buyer comes with the lender already decided, and so it's a good idea just to stay in communication during that 3-4 days before closing. Just make sure that it's the final number, and you can always check with the title company, because I'll get emails from the agent sometimes and they'll say the CD went out to the buyer, can you verify, you know, that it's final and what the amount is. And it's always good for us to know that, because then we are aware if there's any changes made that the buyer needs to know. So, but yeah, unfortunately, TRID really didn't solve a lot of the problems that we were hoping it would. We were hoping it would solve the buyers not having any surprises and actually knowing everything is finalized 3 days before, but they kind of like to use that 10% variable to to their benefit, especially as busy as everyone is and running everything last minute. So it's kind of it kind of is lender by lender, but it's a frustrating thing for the buyers to not know what they need to bring sometimes till the morning of closing. So good question though. Do you guys have any other questions?
No, not for me.
All right, well, that about wraps it up. And I don't know, I don't have any ideas for a topic next, and I don't really know, what everybody's experiences and any specific topics you want to go over with. So I'm welcome to any suggestions if either of you have any.
Nothing right offhand.
All right.
We can shoot something to the office, if I think of something too,
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Otherwise, I was going to kind of delve into, and I don't know if this is anything that agents would be too interested, but I was going to kind of delve a little deeper into estates and, trusts and things like that when your seller, if you have a deceased seller or if you have a trust that's selling or buying, just kind of the things that come up in that. But I don't know if that's of benefit on a standard transaction. It doesn't come up that often, but
One of the things maybe too, I've always thought of too is what, as you go through and you send off your initial purchase agreement and all the documents, what do you need to see going forward and what don't you need to see, or, whether,
as a title company,
from the
Yeah.
title company perspective or just everything.
I always say send it all, because there's certain things that sometimes maybe we don't want to see if there's any money, if there's any personal property or anything like that that's being paid for outside of closing, then it's best not to share that with us or the lender. But I would say just send everything, because, like for example, we don't necessarily need resale disclosures, but sometimes if you can get us those resale disclosures, it gives us the contact information that we need before we have to reach out to the seller to get like their management company information or anything like that. So I always say, when all else fails, just send it all. We just use what we need and leave the rest in the file.
So you don't need to see like the signed resale disclosure, even if you just get the original resale disclosure that came with it, not signed by the buyers, at least you have the information.
Correct. Right. So that's not something that we need to see for title purposes, but like I said, just the contact info. And then the other thing people ask me is like a TISH report. Or how certain cities require a point of sale inspection or whatever they call it. So it's always a good idea they'll send us those as soon as possible. When it's your seller, a lot of times the buyer's title company is requesting those from us, and a lot of times they're not coming to us until last minute. So it just helps if there's any issues that the seller's requiring be remedied, or that the city's requiring be remedied before the sale happens. That way we know if we need to collect lien waivers or pay invoices or get anything inspected by the city, and it just helps to keep the title company involved in that, because we can be of benefit and we can kind of do the legwork for you on that. So share those TISH reports as soon as you get them.
And you kind of even touched on something else too. I've had quite like for your invoices, let's say for inspection, repairs and so forth, do you need to see a lien waiver every time, or can if it says paid on there, is that enough?
That's a title company by title
balance?
company. Yeah, so typically, I think kind of the rule of thumb for most title companies is if it's a paid receipt and it's marked paid and it's under $1,000 or under, we typically don't need a lien waiver. Some title companies are more strict than others and they will require a lien waiver, but most times if it's under $1,000, we're fine with just a paid receipt. For me personally, if I'm closing a buyer transaction and we're insuring it, and the seller's title company sends me a bunch of paid invoices, as long as it matches up with what the purchase agreement, whatever the inspection amendment or addendum says, then I'm okay with it. But for the bigger ticket items, if you put in a radon mitigation, or I'm trying to think of some of the popular ones, sometimes there's a new furnace put in or whatever. If it's anything more than 1,000, it's just a good idea to get us those invoices as soon as possible. And then we reach out to the subcontractors and we ask for those lien waivers. So kind of rule of thumb, but again, I would just always check if you're not working with me, if you're working with a different title company, just ask what their requirements
Because I've run across different scenarios where a seller's has a buddy help them or does it, gives a guy a few bucks, but there's really no invoice or, so how do you guys typically handle? Is that just that the homeowner fixed it himself then?
Yep. Normally what I would ask for, if it's of any value, I guess, if it's not just, if it's written into the purchase agreement that it needs to be done like by a licensed contractor, then of course we ask for those invoices. But if it's just something like, I don't know, something simple that the seller.
Fix
can
a
do on their
little
own,
water
yeah.
leak and the guy can do it himself.
Yep,
you know.
exactly. As long as it doesn't say licensed,
Yep. Okay,
then we're okay. Then we just have usually we just have them sign off on a mechanics lien waiver saying that I did work on the property and no one was hired, and I hold you harmless from any, further liens. So, and it's just a good idea sometimes to get that in an email, but we'll email the seller and say, can you confirm that you completed the items on the inspection amendment on your own, and no subcontractors were hired, and then they just respond yes, and then we have a paper trail. So
okay.
So yeah, those are all good questions. Those are things that come up pretty often, and I think it's good to kind of always have a general rule of thumb on how you handle them. Sometimes we don't know that there's a big ticket item that maybe we're going to escrow for. Like this time of the year, a lot of times I'll see an escrow for if there's a sprinkler system issue and they can't do it because the ground's frozen or whatever, and we'll escrow for that. Or like I had one where they were putting in a whole new septic system. So we usually hold 1.5 times the bid amount. So the sooner you can get the bid, the better. That way we know what the seller is going to be looking at for an escrow holdback. And like I said, that's kind of common this time of the year with certain issues, especially if there's anything with like septic or sprinkler systems or that, anything that's outdoor work this time of the year. So another thing to keep in mind for.
That could be a good topic too, to cover, the whole
Yes.
escrow, and because we're coming in that time of the year. with
Right,
Septic
right.
and,
That's true. That's
yeah.
true. And again, it's pretty standard for every title company to hold 1.5 times the bid, just in case, prices of things go up in that time frame. And then we always want to have an end date so that the buyer is not kind of hanging out there waiting for things to get completed without an end date in mind. So yeah, that's a good one. I'll add that to my list of.
I think
could tie it
sometimes the
into another
lenders
one.
require like a couple bids, don't they? And so,
Yeah, lender by lender. More and more what I'm seeing is that the seller and buyer are both getting their own bids, and then we're kind of just going with which one works best.
do you
But
take the
I haven't
highest then? Do you take the highest bid to escrow?
You can if you can say, this is why we're going with the highest bid. If it's for example, I had one where it was a septic and the one bid came in not as itemized or detailed, and it was maybe I think it was about $1,200 cheaper, but the buyer wanted to go with the more expensive one because it was more detailed and there were less contingencies that could come up, and so they agreed to go with the higher bid. So there would be no surprise cost for anyone. So
Okay,
but that's again transaction by transaction. Obviously, that's part of negotiation. So we try not to get in the middle of that. We just go with what we're told is everybody agrees upon. So. All right, anything else?
that should do it.
All right, well, thanks, Jerry. I really appreciate your feedback as well.
No problem. Thanks so much.
All right, have
Good
a great day.
information.
Thanks.